Hello guys, you're welcome to the Zama Stitches channel. My name is Amaka. Thanks for being here. If you're yet to subscribe to this channel, please click on the subscribe button and subscribe. And don't forget to like and share this video. In this tutorial, we'll be learning how to make a padded princess dart blouse with 720 degrees peplum. And to get started, we are going to be modifying our front and our back basic bodice pattern. I have a tutorial on how to draft a basic bodice pattern. I'll put the link in the description box below so you can check it out later. So let's get started. I've drawn some lines already, so I'm just going to explain what I did. This is my starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. This is my neckline. My neck depth is 4.5 inches. My neck width is 5 inches. Now, whatever your shoulder measurement is, you're going to divide it by 2 and place it on this line. Now, my shoulder measurement is 15 inches. 15 divided by 2 gives you 7.5 inches. Plus half inch seam allowance gives you 8 inches. So what I have here is 8 inches. Now, from this 8 inches line, I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. You know our shoulder is not entirely straight, so I came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope. Now this is my armhole depth. Whatever your armhole measurement is, you have to divide it by 2, and whatever it gives you, you're going to mark it here. Now my armhole measurement is 16 inches. 16 divided by 2 gives you 8 inches. What I have here is 8 inches. This line is 8 inches. Now from this point, I had to extend this point with an horizontal line which will serve as my chest line. Now this is my chest line. I'm going to impute my armhole curve. Now for me to impute my armhole curve, I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. Now the midpoint of this line is 4 inches. This is the midpoint of this line. This is the midpoint of this line. Now from this midpoint, I'm going to come in by 3/4 of an inch for my front armhole curve. I'm going to connect this point to this point to this point with my armhole curve. This is how I'll do it. I'll connect this point to this point. And I'll connect this point to this point. So this is my front armhole curve. I'm going to impute my dart. For me to impute my dart, I'll need my nipple to nipple measurement. My nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches. Plus half inch seam allowance. Because I'm going to cut it out, I'll need 0.5 inch joining allowance. So whatever your nipple to nipple measurement is, divide it by 2. Whatever it gives you, place it here. Now this is how I'll do it. I'm going to place it on my bust point. I'll place it on my waistline. And I'll connect it. From this bust point, I'm going to come down by ½ inch. On the under bust line, I'm marking 2 inches on my under bust line. So I'm going to mark ½ inch here, and on this point, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches. I'm going to do the same thing here. On my waistline, I'm going to mark I'm going to mark 1/2 inch here, and on this point I'm going to mark 1.5 inches. On this point I'm going to do the same thing. Now I'm going to connect these points. I'm going to connect this one with a straight line. Connect this with a straight line. Then I'll use my armhole curve to connect this one. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find the midpoint of this line. This line is 9.5 inches. So the midpoint should be 4 3/4 inches. So this is the midpoint. This is the midpoint of this line. I'm going to mark 3/4 inch from both sides of this point. Now this is how I'll do it. Which means I'm taking out 1.5 inches from here. From my bust point, I'm going to come up by 1/2 inch. And I'll connect this point to this point. I'll connect this point to this point, this point to this point. Now this is how I'll do it. Now take note, on this point, you can decide to use 1/2 inch on both sides of this line. You can decide to mark 1/2 inch on both sides of this line, which means you're using 1 inch for your dart. You can also decide to use 1 inch on both sides of this line, which means you're removing 2 inches for your dart. But I'm going to remove 1.5 inches for my dart. That is why I took 3/4 inch from both sides of this line. So after that, now I'm going to blend this point very well so that I don't have any sharp or pointy edges. Now this 1.5 inches that I'm going to remove here, I'm going to return it here so that I don't run short of fabric. If you don't return it, you're going to run short of fabric. So you have to return it so that you'll be able to create a new armhole curve. Now this is how I'll do it. From here I'm going to mark 1.5 inches from here. So I'll connect this point to this point. So this is it. Now let me label these lines. This is my shoulder point. This is my bust point. This is my under bust point. This is my waistline. And this is my joining allowance. This is my chest line. So I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. I'll take my bust measurement on my chest line. Now my bust circumference is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches. Plus 2.5 inches seam allowance gives you 12 inches. Plus this half inch seam allowance, this half inch I'm going to cut off from here, gives you 12.5 inches. So I'm going to mark 12.5 inches on this line. 12.5 inches. On my waistline, I'm going to take my waist measurement on my waistline. My waist circumference is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches. Plus these 2 inches for that. These 2 inches I'm going to cut off from here gives you 10 inches. Plus 2.5 inches seam allowance gives you 12.5 inches. So I'm going to connect these points together. I'm going to cut this out. So this is it. is a back panel. This is my shoulder line, which is also, this is my starting point, which is also going to serve as my shoulder line. And this is my zipper allowance. My zipper allowance is 1.5 inches. Now, from this point to this point is my chest line. This is my chest line. This is my bust point. This is my under bust point. This is my waistline. And this is my hemming allowance, my joining allowance. Now, this from my neckline, my neck width is 5 inches. Now, whenever you're taking your neck measurement, always remember that your neck width, your front neck width and your back neck width must be the same. The back neck depth can be different, but the neck width must be the same. So my neck width, just like I used on the front panel, is 5 inches. The neck depth is 1 inch. Now this is my shoulder line. I took my shoulder measurement, which is 15 inches divided by 2, which gives you 7.5 inches plus 0.5 inch, which gives you 8 inches. Now from this 8 inches point, I now came down by 1 inch for my shoulder slope, which I connected to my neckline, and this is my armhole depth, which I divided my armhole measurement by 2, which gives me 8 inches. This line is 8 inches, which I now extended to this point, which will serve as my chest point. I extended this point with an horizontal line, which is going to serve as my chest point. Now, I had to find the midpoint of this line, and this is the midpoint of this line. From this midpoint, I used my armhole curve to curve this point to this point. Now take note, the back armhole doesn't go deep. I did not connect it inside like the front. From here, I just drew it down to this point. The next thing I'll do is to impute my dart measurement. Now, for me to get my dart measurement, I'll need to divide my nipple to nipple measurement by 2. My nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches. So I'm going to place that 4 inches on my chest line. On my waistline and on the joining allowance. Now take note, I didn't add half inch on this because I'm not cutting it. I'll connect these points. So from this point, from my chest point, I'm going to come down by 1 inch. Now I'm going to come down by 1 inch and mark. On my waistline, I'm going to take half inch on both sides of my dart line, which means I'm using 1 inch for my dart. Now I'm going to connect this point to this point. I'm going to take my horizontal measurement. I'll start by taking my bust measurement. My bust circumference is 38 inches. 38 divided by 4 gives you 9.5 inches plus 2.5 inches for seam allowance, which gives you 12 inches. So this is 9.5 inches plus 2.5 inches gives you 12 inches. So I'm going to place that, I'm going to mark it on my chest line. I'm going to take my waist measurement on my waistline. My waist circumference is 32 inches. 32 divided by 4 gives you 8 inches plus 1 inch for this dart intake gives you 9 inches. This dart intake, I'm going to return it here because if you don't return it, you're going to run short of fabric. So 8 inches plus 1 inch gives you 9 inches plus 2.5 inches for seam allowance gives you 11.5 inches. So I'm going to place it here. I'll do the same thing on the joining allowance, and I'll connect the point. I'll connect these points together. I'm going to add my shoulder seam allowance. I'm using 1/2 inch for my shoulder seam allowance. The next thing I'm going to do here is to eliminate the zipper board. From here I'll go in by 1 inch and I'll connect it to this point. You can decide to use 0.5 inch. You can also decide to use 3/4 of an inch. It all depends on you, but I'm using 1 inch. Now I'll mark this 1 inch and I'll connect this point to this point. When doing it, you have to do it smoothly. From here I'm going to go in by 1 inch again, now to create a new zipper allowance. And I'll connect it again to this point. So now I have a new zipper allowance. This one is no longer useful. I'm going to cut it out. is my back panel and this is my front panel. Now with this pattern paper, I'm going to cut out my lining and my main fabric. I've used my pattern paper to cut out the main fabric and the lining. So this one is 2, the lining is also 2. This one is 1 and the lining is 1. This is 2 here and the lining is also 2. This is my main fabric. I'm going to pad my main fabric. I'm going to show you how to do it. Now, take note. This is the wrong side of my fabric. I'm padding the wrong side of my fabric. Now, when padding, make sure you leave at least ½ inch on this point, which you are going to use to turn your neckline. This is my underbust point. I'm going to mark my underbust point. Now, I don't want my pad to exceed my underbust point. It's going to stop on my underbust point. This is also my underbust point. I'm going to mark it. I'm going to mark this point as well. This is my underbust point. This is my bust point. I'm going to be working with my nipple to nipple measurement. My nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. 8 divided by 2 gives you 4 inches. Plus ½ inch gives you 4.5 inches. I'll be working with 4.5 inches. Whatever your nipple to nipple measurement is, divide it by 2. Whatever it gives you, add ½ inch to it, and that's what you work with. From my bust point, I'm going to measure 4.5 inches inward, and I'll mark it. From my bust point again, I'll measure 4.5 inches upward, and I'll mark it. Then I'm going to connect all these points together. I'll connect it to my underbust point. I'll do the same thing here. This is my bust point. This is my bust point. From my bust point, I'm going to measure 4.5 inches upward. And I'll mark it. And I'm going to measure from my bust point 4.5 inches inward, and I'll mark. Now I'm going to connect all these points to my underbust point. This is my underbust point. I'll connect all these points to my underbust point. This is my underbust point. I don't want my pad to exceed my underbust point, so I'm going to mark this underbust point and cut it out. I'll also cut this part. And I'll cut this part as well. I'm going to use my pressing iron to press this very well. I'm going to press it. When I press it, this is going to stick to the fabric. I'll do it and show you. I've ironed it and it has glued to the fabric. Now this is it. It has glued to the fabric. So I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to turn it and cut it. So this is what I have. At the end of the day, this is what I have. This is what I have. This is my fabric. I've ironed interfacing on my fabric. This interfacing is called hairstay in Nigeria, in case if you're looking for it in the market. Now, I'm going to take this to my sewing machine and I will sew it from the down part. I'll sew it upward. This is what I'll do. I'll sew it like this, like this. This is how I'll sew it. I'll sew it upward. After sewing, I'm going to notch it and iron it. The same thing I did here, I'm also going to do it here. I'll sew from the down part, I'll sew upward. And I'll notch and iron. This is the back panel and this is the zipper allowance. So I'm going to take this to my sewing machine. I'll sew it with gather stitches, which I'm still going to remove later. Now the same thing I did on my main fabric, I did the same thing on my lining. I've also ironed interfacing on my lining. And the same way I'm going to sew the front, that's how I'll sew the same way I'm going to sew the main fabric, that's how I'll sew the lining. So I'll do it and show you. I'm going to cut the lower part of my blouse, which is the peplum. Now for me to cut the lower part of my blouse, I'll have to minus the upper part from the full length. The upper part of my blouse is 16 inches. While the full length is 25 inches. 16 minus 25 minus 16 inches gives you 9 inches. So the length of my peplum is 9 inches. Plus 1 inch seam allowance, which I'm going to use to join the peplum to the blouse, to the upper part. I'm going to use 0.5 inch to join the peplum to the blouse and 0.5 inch to hem the down parts, which is 1 inch. 1 inch plus 9 inches gives you 10 inches. So I'll be working with, the length of the peplum I'll be working with is 10 inches. After sewing, I'll still fall back to 9 inches, which is the actual length of my peplum. Because I want my peplum to be full, I'll use 720 degrees peplum. I'll divide my waist circumference by 2 because I'm going to cut 360 times 2, which gives you 720. Now my waist circumference is 32 inches. 32 divided by 2 gives you 16 inches. 16 inches plus 2 inches seam allowance, which I'm going to use to join the front to the back, gives you 18 inches. So the waist measurement for this particular peplum is 18 inches. So what I'll be working with is 18 inches. For me to get my waist radius, I'm going to divide 18 inches by 6.28, which gives me 2.8. But I'm going to approximate that 2.8 to 3. So my waist radius is 3 inches. So 3 inches plus my peplum length. My peplum length is 10 inches. Plus 3 inches gives you 13 inches. So what I'll be working with is 13 inches. For you to know the amount of fabric you'll be working with, all you need to do is to measure. Now, what I'm working with, the measurement I'm working with is 13 inches. For me to know the amount of fabric I need to work with, I'm going to measure 13 plus 13 gives you 26. So I'm going to measure 26. I'll make sure that my fabric is up to 26 inches. Yes, my fabric is up to 26 inches from here. It's even more than 26 inches. Then I'm also going to check here to know whether my fabric is up to 26 inches. It's more than 26 inches. So that is how to know the amount of fabric to work with. Now, I'm going to fold my fabric into 2. I'll fold it into 2. Then I'll fold it again into 4. Now this is it. I've folded my fabric into 4. Now this is the folded part of my fabric. Now from this edge, I'm going to measure 13 inches. I'll start by measuring 3 inches, which is my waist radius. Now from here, I'm going to measure 3 inches, which is my waist radius. So this is my waist radius. From here, I'm still going to measure 10 inches. Now from here to here is 13 inches. I'm going to measure 13 inches from here. From here to here, I measured 13 inches. From here to here, I measured 3 inches. Now this 3 inches is my waist radius, while from here to here is my peplum length. So I'm going to cut it now. So this is my, take note, this is my front, this is the front peplum. This one is going to be at the front, while the other one is going to be at the back. I'm going to cut the back. This is the back peplum. My waist circumference is 32 inches. 32 divided by 2 gives you 16 inches. Plus 2 inches for seam allowance, which I'm going to use to join the front and the back, gives you 18 inches. Plus 3 inches zipper allowance, which 3 inches zipper allowance, 1.5 inch will be for one side and 1.5 inch for the other side, gives you 21 inches. 21 divided by 6.28 gives you 3.3, but I'm going to make it 3.5 inches instead. So my waist radius, the waist radius I'm working with is 3.5 inches. 3.5 plus 10 inches, which is my peplum length, gives you 13.5 inches. So what I'll be working with is 13.5 inches. Now the same thing I did on the front one, that's what I'm going to do here again. I'm going to fold my fabric into 2, then I'll fold it into 4, and I'll cut from this edge. This is the folded part. I'm going to cut from this edge. From this edge, I'm going to measure 3.5 inches. So this is my waist radius. Now I'm going to measure 13.5 inches. From here to here, 13.5 inches. So this is my waist radius. From here to here is 3.5 inches. But if you measure from here to here, it's 10 inches. From here to here is 10 inches. So this is my peplum length. I'll cut it. So this is my back. This is the back peplum. This is the back and this is the front. I'm going to use this to cut the lining.